Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going to be talking all about digital marketing procurement.
Sounds good.
We found this really awesome article called Introduction to Digital Marketing Procurement.
Okay.
And we're going to learn about picking vendors and building a really solid procurement process
Cool.
and even kind of getting into the future of digital marketing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting parts of it is how you can make sure that you are getting the most out of your budget
Right.
and that you are using the right tools and partners
Yeah.
to get real results.
Yeah. So before we get into all of that good stuff,
Yeah.
what exactly is digital marketing procurement?
Yeah.
Is this just like a fancy way of saying that I'm going on an online shopping spree for all of my marketing materials?
Well, I mean, it does involve shopping, but it's really about finding the right resources.
Okay.
So yeah, it's about the buying and the managing of all the resources that go into your online presence.
Okay.
So we're talking about everything from SEO specialists to PPC campaigns to social media gurus and content creators and those data people who can just
Yeah.
decipher all those analytics.
Right.
Yeah.
So more like an architect than a shopper.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good analogy because you need to think about the landscape.
Okay.
And it's a very vast and ever-changing landscape, so you need to really know it well.
Yeah, that's what I find intimidating about it. Is the article talked about all these vendors and services.
Yeah.
How do I even know where to start?
Well, I think the key is to have a strategy.
Okay.
The article talks about it. You need to define what your needs are and what your goals are.
Right.
So, what are you actually trying to achieve? Do you want to, boost brand awareness or generate leads or drive sales?
It's just like any other project.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just start building a house without a blueprint.
Exactly. And then once you have that blueprint, then you need to know who you're building it for.
Okay.
You need to know your audience. So the article gives this example of millennials.
Okay.
They're very tech savvy,
Yeah.
very engaged online, especially in social media and through influencers.
And so speaking of that, let's get into Company A that was
Okay.
mentioned in the article because they had a really interesting example of reaching millennials.
Yeah.
What did they do?
So they knew that millennials like authenticity and they like engagement.
Okay.
So they focused a lot on social media management and they really got into influencer collaborations. But what I thought was really interesting is they didn't just pick any influencer or platform.
Uh-huh.
They went specifically for micro-influencers.
Yeah.
And they found them on platforms like TikTok and Instagram,
Okay.
where that audience is spending all their time.
Yeah, so they were being really strategic about it.
Right.
They didn't just throw a bunch of money at social media and hope for the best.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the procurement side gets really interesting because they understood their target audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so they also understood which vendors would be best to reach that audience.
So it's not just about finding the cheapest vendor.
Right.
It's about finding a vendor who actually knows my audience and can deliver those results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're choosing a partner to work with.
Okay.
And you need to make sure they can help you achieve those very specific marketing goals that you have.
So let's get into choosing a vendor.
Yes.
What are some things that I need to be thinking about?
Okay, well, so price is a factor, but the article really stresses that it's not the only factor.
Right.
You also need to think about the reputation of the supplier, their history of success, what kind of technology they use,
Okay.
customer support.
So kind of I would check references before hiring a contractor for a big project.
Exactly. Yeah, and the article talked about how Company A was evaluating 2 different suppliers
Okay.
for social media management.
Got it.
And one was cheaper, but the other one, while more expensive, had a much better track record. And they had better tools.
And so was there anything surprising about how Company A chose who they wanted to work with based on the article?
What really stood out to me was how much they emphasized data and analytics.
Oh.
They specifically looked for vendors who were using these really advanced analytics tools to track their campaigns.
Right.
So things like SEMrush and Google Analytics and stuff like that.
Got it.
And this allowed them to really measure the return on their investment.
So even though they were working with influencers and focusing on engagement, they still wanted to have that hard data.
Yeah, they understood that data is super important these days.
Right.
And they wanted a partner who could be transparent with the data
Right.
and then help them optimize the campaigns based on that data.
So what you're saying is that even if I'm not a data scientist, I should at least understand like the basics of analytics.
Exactly. And it's not about finding the vendor with the coolest dashboards or whatever.
Right.
It's about finding someone who can help you understand that data and make adjustments to your strategy based on the data.
Okay, so we've defined our goals, we've mapped our audience,
Yes.
we've looked at suppliers,
Yeah.
we've emphasized data.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Well, so the journey isn't over once you've picked your vendor or vendors.
Okay.
The article talks a lot about ongoing management of the relationship.
Yeah.
Like, how do you make sure that the suppliers you choose stay aligned with what your needs are
Okay.
and they keep up with your strategies?
And that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
And so in the next part, we're going to be talking about how company A managed those relationships
Exactly.
and how they stayed ahead of the curve with this crazy world of digital marketing.
It's going to be good.
So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So last time we were talking about how important that ongoing management is in digital marketing procurement.
Right. It's not just something that you can set and forget.
Exactly.
You got to stay on top of it.
So the article brought up Company A as a really good example of how to do that.
Yeah.
So walk me through how they managed things with supplier Y once they chose to work with them.
Yeah, so they did regular performance reviews.
Okay.
They weren't just like getting reports and filing them away. They were actually looking at the data, asking questions.
Yeah.
Making sure that the campaign was actually meeting the goals that they had set out.
So being proactive.
Yeah, and being communicative, making sure that everybody was on the same page.
So what happens if things weren't going so well?
Right.
What if the data showed that the campaign wasn't doing what they wanted it to do?
Right. Well, that's where the collaboration aspect comes in.
Right.
The article talked about how Company A wasn't afraid to have those tough conversations with supplier Y.
Okay.
And they would work together to figure out why things weren't working and then adjust the strategy.
So it was less about pointing fingers and more about working together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to find a supplier that really fits with your company culture. If you have that sort of collaborative approach, you want a supplier who works the same way.
And I would imagine that that's a big part of staying ahead of the curve too, because digital marketing is always changing.
It is.
So did Company A do
Listen.
anything specific to make sure that they were keeping up with all the new trends and technologies?
Yeah, they actually did a couple of things.
Okay.
First, they encouraged continuous learning within their team.
Okay.
So they would go to conferences and read industry publications.
Mm-hmm.
They really prioritized staying in the loop about the latest stuff in digital marketing.
So it's not just about the supplier staying up to date, it's about your whole team doing it.
Yeah, everybody needs to be on board with that.
Right.
The second thing that they did was they had this regular evaluation of their own needs and strategies,
Okay.
because what worked a year ago might not work today.
Right.
So they made sure that they could adapt to the changes.
It's like digital marketing is just one big game of Tetris where everything's always moving and changing.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, you got to stay flexible.
So it made me wonder though, like what about the supplier?
Right.
How do you make sure that the supplier is also innovating and keeping up with all the changes?
Well, the article talks about how you should choose suppliers who are really passionate about what they do.
Okay.
Company A specifically went for suppliers who had a reputation for thinking outside the box.
So you're looking for people who are kind of like entrepreneurs, even if they work for a big company.
Yeah, they should be excited about trying new things and pushing boundaries.
So they should see you as a partner, not just a client.
Exactly. Yeah, they should be on this journey with you.
So I guess one way to figure that out is to see if they invest in things like research and development,
Yeah, for sure.
or if they're, kind of thought leaders in their field.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what Company A did, and it worked out really well for them.
It's been a really cool case study.
Yeah.
It really kind of shows how complex digital marketing procurement is, but it can also be a little overwhelming, especially if you're just getting started.
It's a lot to learn.
Yeah, so in the last part, we're going to try to simplify things.
Okay.
We'll talk about the key takeaways from the article and give some practical tips
Sounds good.
so you can actually start using this stuff.
I like it.
So stay with us. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we have covered so much in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We talked about like defining what digital marketing procurement is.
Mm-hmm.
We got into vendor selection and management.
Yeah.
So now I'm ready for like the TLDR version.
Okay.
What are the top things that people should keep in mind?
Okay, so number one, remember this is a strategic process.
Okay.
It's not just about like checking off boxes.
Got it.
It really starts with knowing what your goals are
Okay.
and understanding who you're trying to reach.
Like we said before,
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
don't know where you're going,
Yeah,
any road will get you there.
exactly. And then once you have that clear direction, you can start to figure out what you need.
Like what resources, what expertise.
And then that's when you can start finding the right partners to actually make it happen.
Yes.
And the article is really big on like not just going for the cheapest option when you're picking a supplier.
Right. You got to look at the bigger picture.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So think about things like their reputation,
Okay,
what kind of experience they have, their approach to data and analytics,
okay.
and most importantly, like how well their culture fits with yours.
So it's kind of like dating, right?
Yeah.
You're not just looking for like a quick fling, you're looking for a real partner.
Yeah. You want to be compatible.
Right. So somebody who shares my values,
Uh-huh.
understands my goals, and is actually invested in me succeeding.
Yeah. And just like any good relationship,
Mm-hmm.
communication is super important.
Okay.
Remember how Company A did those regular performance reviews
Yes.
and they talked openly with their suppliers about any problems that came up?
Right. So that proactive approach. Yeah, that's really key, especially in the fast-paced world of digital marketing.
Which makes me think about staying ahead of the curve because it changes so quickly.
Yeah.
The article talks a lot about continuous monitoring.
Yeah.
How do I actually do that? Like, what are some practical tips?
Okay. So one thing you can do is set up Google Alerts
Okay.
for keywords related to your industry
Got it.
and the specific services that you're looking for.
Okay.
So that'll tell you about any breaking news or trends or new tech.
That's like having my own personal assistant who just like
Right.
feeds me the news that I need.
Exactly. And then once you're informed, you got to be ready to adapt
Okay.
because the digital landscape is like always shifting.
So I got to be flexible.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to experiment and try new things to see what works.
And this brings me back to data and analytics
Uh-huh.
because, Company A really prioritized data in their decisions.
They did.
So what if I'm not like a data expert, but I want to get better at using data?
You know, a good place to start is by learning the basic metrics.
Okay.
So things like website traffic, conversion rates, social media engagement.
Yeah.
There's tons of free stuff online that can teach you about this.
So I don't have to be a statistician.
No, you don't.
Okay, that's good to know.
And then as you learn more, you can get into more advanced stuff like A/B testing or predictive analytics.
So it's all about like building up that data knowledge.
Exactly, yeah. Take it one step at a time.
So before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
any final thoughts for our listeners?
I would just say remember that it's a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
So enjoy the challenges, stay curious, and keep learning.
Yeah, the digital marketing world is never boring, that's for sure.
That's the truth.
And just remember, it's not about finding the cheapest vendor, it's about finding the right partner.
Right.
Someone who gets your vision and helps you grow and succeed.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this digital marketing procurement deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, happy procuring.